Hello, you amazing people. It seems that another hurricane is keeping us apart. Tuesday and Thursday will make for our second and third class that we will not have together for our, what is actually a pretty short semester, our TWK semester together. Uh, I've been trying to kind of decide what would be the best way forward for our class, and I think it is in our best interest to get some work accomplished. So it is my hope that we can push forward with Greek philosophy. When I see you again, I do intend to kind of discuss some of these ideas, so I'm not just talking at you. I also want to hear your thoughts on the material. So this is just going to be a quick lecture to help you sort of stay on course and complete this week's short writing assignment. So we spent a lot of time on Greek myth, and I think one thing that we all can agree on was that the Greek gods, the gods of Olympus, they don't really behave very well, right? They kind of act almost like immature humans. They are very jealous, they kind of throw temper tantrums, they're very vengeful, and this is directly related to the natural disasters that are occurring in this region. It's just very difficult to reconcile maybe uh, benevolent, kind gods with kind of all these natural disasters that are happening, right? It just makes more sense that they aren't very nice because the people in Greece they're doing what they think that they're supposed to be doing in accordance with their religion, right? They're building temples, they are sacrificing, they're engaging in various rituals that should be pleasing to the gods, but yet the gods keep punishing them. So after a while, the Greeks they're pretty inquisitive. They're starting to recognize that there are certain rules of the natural world, certain things that they can kind of predict about the natural world just based on their knowledge of it, and they make what is known as the speculative leap. They thought to themselves, what if all these natural disasters have absolutely nothing to do with angry, vengeful gods? What if there's actually a natural explanation to the things that are happening in Greece? All right, so as I mentioned the last time we were all together, the philosophy is actually, as when it begins, is a bit different than we understand philosophy now. We're not just talking about like Hobbes and Rousseau and Nietzsche. Philosophers didn't just like kind of look for the meaning of life. They were kind of in the pursuit of all knowledge. And for this reason, a lot of our earliest philosophers might be better understood to us as maybe scientists or mathematicians, but they are, in fact, philosophers because philosophers are simply people who seek out knowledge. The first philosophers were very into the natural world, which is why we've referred to them as the naturalist philosophers. They are also before Socrates, so we call them the pre-Socratics. The pre-Socratics asked some really big questions like, what is everything made of? Or how do things come into existence? And Thales, he's actually the world's first philosopher, theorized that the world was made of water, that water was the primary substance that everything is made of. Now, we know in the 21st century that that is not accurate. However, Thales was onto something. He did sort of sense that there was an explanation to what everything was made of, and he started to ask those big questions. We also have Heraclitus, who suggested that the world is in a permanent stage of flux. And if you are familiar with modern physics, you know that this is still a prevailing theory in physics. So how he knew that, I don't know, but I'm fascinated that he did. We also had Leucippus, who theorized that the world is made of atoms, and of course that's exactly what the world is made of. Then we have Pythagoras, which you probably have heard of Pythagoras before, maybe just his theorem. He was the founding father of mathematics, and he believed that proportion through numbers was the basis of reality. He was also the OG vegetarian. He had some pretty unconventional ideas, particularly for the time period, about vegetarianism, and there was a cult associated with him. You could go and you could join his cult, and you could live with him in his commune and learn from him, learn his ways. And it was a very sort of secretive organization. If that's interesting to you, I encourage you to look to investigate that one further. Hippocrates, he was the father of medical ethics. You have probably heard of the Hippocratic Oath. If you intend to be a doctor, probably at some point in your life, you are going to take the Hippocratic Oath, which is often sort of simplified down to first do no harm. And then from the natural philosophers, we move into the sophist. While the naturalist philosophers focused on physical reality, the sophists were more concerned with the world in terms of the mind and the metaphysical, the branch of physics that engages with abstract thought. Now, this is very important. You probably remember when we were talking about the myths and we were trying to nail down the morality that the myth was trying to kind of convey. We had a hard time pinning it down. There were just certain behaviors that definitely the Greeks approved of and disapproved of. Remember, we talked about hubris and how you don't want to get too cocky in the ancient world. That is not something that the gods like. And we also had the observance of xenia, or that guest friendship. You wanted to make sure that you were kind to strangers, that you extended that hospitality to strangers. But other than that, it was a little hard to pin down. A big part of why that's the case is because Greek culture is so focused on the individual. Individualism, remember, is an incredibly important value in the ancient Greek world. Another thing that we see with the sophists is that they think things that like truth and justice are subjective. So if you think about, if the focus is on the individual, then it probably morality is going to mean something different from person to person. All right, so that brings us to Socrates. Socrates did not agree with the sophists. He actually kind of thought they were hacks. He really felt very strongly about education, and he didn't really much appreciate the fact that the sophists charged for their services for educating people. He also felt that morality and concepts like truth and justice were not subjective. He actually believes in the absolute nature of truth and justice and an unchanging moral order. He also insisted that a life unexamined is not a life worth living. So he encouraged people to forever be looking inward, to kind of be asking themselves the big questions, to be testing their understanding, their knowledge, and also to make sure that they were living a life full of purpose and meaning. And that's definitely a philosophy from Socrates that has carried into the 21st century. In addition, he used a question and answer technique known as the dialectical method. You have probably encountered this method most of your education. I definitely use it in my classroom. That's why oftentimes I'll ask you a question. It's a very open-ended question. It seldom has just one answer, and that is to kind of help you to think about it and to kind of explore those things on your own. So that's something that began with Socrates. Socrates was religiously skeptical. He didn't always have a lot of patience for the gods of Olympus, and he was also very outspoken in his commitment to free inquiry. So he didn't appreciate censorship. He didn't want anybody telling him kind of what he was allowed to kind of talk about. Sometimes he made people a bit uncomfortable. A big part of that was the fact that he did kind of question so many things. And sometimes that made him a bit unpopular. But for the most part, Socrates was pretty popular in ancient Greece. However, this eventually gets him into trouble. When he is 70 years old, he is brought to trial for a number of charges, including subversive behavior and atheism. Consequently, Socrates is found guilty and he is sentenced to death. The means of his execution is actually suicide by hemlock poisoning. And in the 1787 painting, you can see Socrates. He's the one there on the bed, and he's kind of got his finger up, and he's still philosophizing. He's still spreading his truth, even as he reaches for that chalice of hemlock with his other hand. You can see the various people around him who are quite distraught at their loss of Socrates. Okay, so that takes us to Plato. Plato is actually a pupil of Socrates. He is a member of the aristocracy, so he is pretty wealthy. He has a lot of time on his hands, so he is able to devote an incredible amount of energy, effort to his studies with Socrates. Plato actually founded the first school of philosophy. It is known as the Academy. That's capital A Academy. I know today it is a common noun that is sometimes used interchangeably with the word school, but when we see that capital A Academy, we are talking about Plato's school. Now, remember that philosophy in ancient Greece is not just that narrow little discipline of human knowledge that we have today. Philosophy is going to encompass everything, all human knowledge in Greece. So that's going to be things like mathematics and science and art and gymnastics. Pretty much all anything that you can study at that time period, you're probably going to be able to learn about at the academy. Plato is a very prolific author, which is unlike Socrates, who, as far as we know, never wrote anything down. So most of what we know about Socrates, we know because Plato said so. So sometimes it can be tough to discern, how much of this philosophy is Plato's and how much of it is Socrates. He told his treatise in a question-answer dialogue format. So you should have read Plato's Allegory of the Cave, and hopefully you did. And when you looked at it, it probably looks a bit like a play, because it would be like Glaucon, colon, and what Glaucon said, and it would be Socrates, colon, and what Socrates said. And it's kind of told as a conversation that goes back and forth between Socrates and Glaucon. And this sort of back and forth dialogue format is just the aesthetic of the time. This is just one of the ways that authors liked to tell stories, and it actually continues sort of well into the Middle Ages as far as this aesthetic goes. Again, it's just a way of storytelling. Okay, so let's talk about Plato's theory of forms. In your reading in the textbook last week, you should have encountered Plato's theory of forms. I'm not sure how much of an understanding you gained from that. I actually think it's a pretty good explanation that Fioro gives in your textbook. I think I would have benefited from her explanation when I was first learning the theory of forms. But if you didn't quite get it then, don't worry. I'm going to try to explain it in very sort of simple terms now. But even if after my explanation you're still a little confused, please don't worry. I'm going to revisit it again when I see you on Tuesday. So in a nutshell, Plato theorized that there is actually two levels of reality. One is constantly changing and can be detected with our senses. So when I say something's real, I probably mean like what I'm able to kind of detect around me. So right now I'm sitting on the floor. I can feel the hardwood beneath me. I can see the light coming from the lamp behind me. I can hear the sound of my own voice. So that's the reality that I can, I should probably be in front, that I am able to detect with my senses. But Plato says that there's actually another reality, and in it there are these eternal and perfect truths. And Plato refers to these truths as the forms. That's capital F forms. Justice, love, and beauty are just a few examples. The example that's given in your textbook, which I actually think kind of works pretty well, is so if we think of a sphere, right? A sphere, if we think about some spheres that we encounter in our physical world, right? Maybe a basketball or a beach ball, maybe a tennis ball. Those are all spheres. So according to Plato's theory, those spheres are sort of imperfect. They're sort of imperfect copies of the actual form of a sphere that exists in this other plane of reality. So if we were to destroy all of the spheres on the planet, it wouldn't matter because the sphere, the form of a sphere, would still exist in this other plane of existence. So I know that's a lot. Again, if you don't quite grasp that yet, don't worry. But try to kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we explore Plato's allegory of the cave. So you're actually going to move on to the next video, and I will rejoin you after that.